In the gleaming heart of Silicon Valley, where success was measured in stock options and series of funding, Marcus Stone stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office. At 35, he'd built Stone Tech Solutions into a billion-dollar empire, and he never let anyone forget it. His reflection in the glass showed exactly what he wanted the world to see: perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit, Patek Philippe watch, and that practiced smile that graced countless tech magazines. Another record quarter, he said to himself, scrolling through the revenue reports on his phone. Each upward trending graph was a testament to his belief: success was a choice, and failure was nothing but laziness wrapped in excuses. Below his window, San Francisco's streets teemed with life. Among the bustling crowds, his eyes caught something that made his practiced smile twist into a scowl. A homeless man was sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk, a small paper cup in front of him. The sight offended Marcus's sensibilities, a blemish on his picture-perfect view of success. What Marcus didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that the man below had a name: Tom Wheeler. And Tom Wheeler's story was everything Marcus refused to believe in. 10 years earlier, Tom had been a respected sergeant in the Marine Corps, with a loving wife named Sarah and a modest but happy life in suburban California. Then came Sarah's diagnosis: aggressive pancreatic cancer. The military insurance covered some of it, but the experimental treatments that might have saved her life didn't fall under their policy. Tom had done everything right. He'd emptied their savings, sold their house, maxed out every credit card. In the end, it still wasn't enough. Sarah passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning, leaving Tom with nothing but memories and a mountain of medical debt that would eventually cost him everything. Now, at 52, Tom's possessions fit in a worn military backpack. His bed was a piece of cardboard in a sheltered alley, and his daily goal was simply to collect enough change to eat. But even after everything, he maintained a dignity that came from knowing who he was: a man who'd sacrificed everything for love. The paper cup in front of him held exactly $4.87. $3 more, and he could afford a hot meal at the diner where Jenny, the kind-hearted waitress, would sometimes slip him extra fries. He'd been sitting there for 6 hours, his joints stiff from the cold concrete, but his thank you remained genuine for every penny dropped in his cup. Marcus watched this scene from above, his irritation growing. He'd been raised on the gospel of self-made success, conveniently forgetting the full-ride scholarship that had put him through Stanford. In his mind, he'd clawed his way to the top through pure grit and determination. People like the man below were simply refusing to do the same. "Mr. Stone." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your 3 p.m. is waiting." "Push it back 15 minutes, Marcus replied, an idea forming in his mind. "I need some air." The descent from his office to the street took exactly 47 seconds in his private elevator. Each step in his handcrafted Oxford shoes echoed against the marble lobby floor as he approached the revolving door. The security guard nodded deferentially, used to Marcus's occasional walks, which usually meant closing deals over coffee with other tech executives. But today was different. Marcus approached Tom's spot on the sidewalk, his tall frame casting a shadow over the veteran's weathered face. Tom looked up, offering his usual gentle smile, not yet understanding what was about to happen. "Rough day?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Blessed to see another one, sir," Tom replied, his military bearings still evident in his posture despite his circumstances. Marcus nodded, appearing to consider Tom's words. Then, in one fluid motion, he reached down, grabbed the paper cup, and poured its contents, $4.87 of human kindness, into his own pocket. "Here's a lesson in economics," Marcus announced, loud enough for nearby pedestrians to hear. "Money isn't given. It's earned. Maybe this will motivate you to try actually working for a change." Tom's face didn't register anger. Instead, something far worse spread across his features: a deep, soul-crushing disappointment in humanity. It was the same look he'd had when the doctors had told him they couldn't do anything more for Sarah. "I don't know what happened to make you so cruel, sir," Tom said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "but I'll pray for you tonight anyway." Marcus's smirk faltered for a split second. Something in Tom's words, in his dignified response to cruelty, stirred a long-buried memory, his own mother's voice, trembling but proud, as she stretched their food stamps to the end of the month. He pushed the thought away as quickly as it came. "Save your prayers," Marcus sneered. "Try a job application instead." He turned on his heel, the stolen coins jingling in his pocket like tiny bells of shame, though he wasn't ready to recognize that sound for what it was. As he walked away, he didn't see Tom's shoulders sag, didn't know that this was the first day in 3 that the veteran had hoped to eat a proper meal. He didn't see the young woman with her phone raised, recording the entire interaction with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. Marcus Stone returned to his office, convinced he'd taught a valuable lesson about personal responsibility. But as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city, he couldn't quite shake the echo of Tom's words, or the nagging memory of his own mother's struggles that he'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. What he didn't realize was that this moment, this single act of casual cruelty, would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter his carefully constructed world and force him to confront the very truths he'd spent his entire adult life denying. The real lesson was about to begin, and it would cost him far more than the $4.87 jingling in his pocket. The video spread like wildfire across social media. Tech CEO steals from homeless veteran. The headlines wrote themselves. The shaky smartphone footage showed every excruciating second. Marcus's smug expression, Tom's quiet dignity, and the cruel jingling of stolen coins. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times, each share adding fuel to the growing inferno of public outrage. That evening, Tom's world went dark. After 18 hours without food, his body finally gave out. A street artist found him unconscious near his usual spot and called an ambulance. As paramedics lifted his frail frame onto a stretcher, they discovered his military ID, and suddenly, the story gained another devastating layer. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his penthouse, watching his empire crumble in real time. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. Twitter was ablaze with #StoneCold and #KarmaComing hashtags. His PR team had gone into crisis mode, but their carefully crafted statements only seemed to make things worse. "I think you should see this," his assistant said, placing a tablet in front of him. The screen showed a deep-dive article from a prominent tech journal. They'd found records of his past, the food stamps, the subsidized housing, his mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat. Photos surfaced of a young Marcus Stone standing in free lunch lines, wearing donated clothes. The stock price of Stone Tech Solutions was in freefall. Major clients began distancing themselves, their PR teams working overtime to avoid guilt by association. Board members were calling emergency meetings. The carefully constructed facade of the self-made billionaire was cracking, revealing the frightened boy who'd once promised himself he'd never be poor again. "Your mother is trying to reach you," his assistant added quietly, sliding a handwritten note across his desk. Marcus stared at it, his mother's familiar handwriting bringing back memories he'd spent years burying. He remembered the shame of using food stamps at the grocery store, the whispers of other kids when he wore the same clothes too many days in a row. He remembered his mother's tears late at night when she thought he was sleeping, and her unwavering pride in him despite their circumstances. Most of all, he remembered the day he'd promised himself that he would become someone else, someone who would never know that kind of helplessness again. The transformation had been complete. He'd changed his accent, adopted expensive tastes, and crafted a new origin story. Marcus Stone, the self-made tech genius who'd built himself from nothing through pure grit and determination. The lie had become his truth, and he'd believed it so completely that he'd become capable of stealing from someone who reminded him of his past self. His phone buzzed again. This time it was James Chin, his biggest investor and mentor. "I'm pulling out, Marcus," James said without preamble. "But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I remember a different Marcus Stone, the hungry kid with big dreams who came to my office 15 years ago. What happened to him?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Before he could respond, his assistant interrupted with breaking news. Tom Wheeler had been admitted to the hospital. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, and exposure. The doctors mentioned he hadn't eaten in days. Social media exploded with Tom's story. Fellow veterans shared his service record: 2 Purple Hearts, a Bronze Star. Someone found old photos of Tom and Sarah, young and in love, before cancer destroyed their world. A reporter uncovered the paper trail of medical bills, the desperate attempts to save his wife, the slow descent into homelessness. Marcus's carefully constructed world wasn't just cracking anymore. It was completely shattering. He watched his company's stock price plummet another 30% in a single hour. His phone kept buzzing with calls from lawyers, board members, and reporters, but all he could think about was Tom's words, "I don't know what happened to make you so cruel." The answer was there, buried under years of denial. Fear had made him cruel. Fear of returning to poverty, fear of being seen as weak, fear of acknowledging that success wasn't just about personal choice, that sometimes good people could do everything right and still lose everything. Late that night, alone in his penthouse office, Marcus found himself staring at his reflection in the same window where our story began. The designer's suit felt like a costume now, the expensive watch like a shackle. In his pocket he still had the $4.87 in change coins that had cost him his reputation, his company's future, and most importantly his self-delusion. His mother's note still lay unopened on his desk. With trembling hands he finally read it. "My son, I've never been ashamed of where we came from. But today, I'm ashamed of where you've gone. It's time to remember who you really are." The words broke something inside him. For the first time in decades, Marcus Stone, the real Marcus Stone, began to cry. Tears for the mother he'd distanced himself from, for the past he'd denied, for Tom Wheeler lying in a hospital bed, and for the frightened boy who'd thought the only way to escape poverty was to become someone else entirely. As dawn broke over San Francisco, Marcus made his first genuine decision in years. He wouldn't hide behind PR statements or legal teams. He wouldn't try to spin this or salvage his reputation. Instead, he would do the one thing he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding. He would face the truth. He picked up his phone and began to type. "I want to tell you about a boy who was once poor, who grew up to become a man afraid of his own past. And I want to tell you about the day that man stole $4.87 from someone who reminded him too much of who he used to be." The post went viral for very different reasons than the original video. This time, people shared it not out of outrage, but out of recognition of a universal truth. Sometimes the longest journey is the one from who we pretend to be to who we really are. But for Marcus, this was just the beginning. The hardest part of his journey, and the most important one, still lay ahead in a hospital room across town, where Tom Wheeler was fighting his own battle, unaware that his quiet dignity had sparked a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. In the fluorescent-lit hospital corridor, Marcus Stone stood outside room 247, no longer wearing his designer suit. Instead, he was dressed in simple jeans and a faded Stanford hoodie, clothes that felt more honest. In his hands, he clutched a small paper cup filled with exactly $4.87 in change. The nurse at the station recognized him from the news but said nothing as he finally gathered the courage to knock on Tom's door. A weak "come in" answered him. Tom lay in the hospital bed, looking smaller than Marcus remembered, connected to 4 fluids that were slowly bringing life back to his dehydrated body. When he saw Marcus, his expression didn't change, no anger, no resentment, just that same quiet dignity that had haunted Marcus for days. "I brought something back to you," Marcus said, his voice cracking as he placed the cup on the bedside table. "Though I know now it's not nearly enough." Tom's eyes moved to the cup, then back to Marcus. "Sit down, son," he said softly, using the same tone he'd once used with young Marines under his command. "You look like you've been through your own war." Marcus sank into the chair beside the bed, and for the first time in years, he let his carefully constructed walls crumble completely. The story poured out of him, about his mother working multiple jobs, about the shame of poverty, about the boy who decided that success meant becoming someone else entirely. "I used to stand in free lunch lines," Marcus confessed, tears streaming down his face. "And when I saw you on that street, it was like looking at everything I've spent my life running from. I thought I was teaching you a lesson, but I was really just punishing myself." Tom listened silently, his weathered face showing not judgment but understanding. When Marcus finished, Tom reached for the cup of coins and held it up to the light. "You know what I see when I look at these coins?" Tom asked. I see every person who dropped them in my cup. The kid who gave me his ice cream money. The woman who apologized for only having pennies. Each coin is a story of kindness. That's what you really took that day, not money, but faith in human goodness. Marcus broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs. How can you be so kind to me after what I did? Because, Tom said quietly, Sarah taught me that bitterness is a heavier burden than poverty. And because I recognize the look of someone who's lost their way. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The viral video had destroyed Marcus's tech empire, but sitting in that hospital room, he found something more valuable, his humanity. I want to make this right, Marcus said, wiping his eyes. Not for the publicity, not for my company, but because I need to become someone my mother can be proud of again. Over the next few months, Marcus sold his penthouse, his cars, and most of his possessions. With the remaining money from his crumbled empire, he established the Second Chance Foundation, with Tom as his partner and advisor. They converted an abandoned warehouse into a shelter that offered not just beds, but job training, mental health services, and most importantly, dignity. The same social media that had destroyed Marcus's reputation now shared a different story, one of redemption, transformation, and the power of confronting one's own truth. The foundation's first success story was helping a talented programmer who'd lost everything to medical debt. She now led their technology training program. Marcus moved into a modest apartment and reconnected with his mother, who now volunteered at the foundation, cooking meals that reminded many residents of home. The designer suits stayed in storage, replaced by work clothes that got dirty, helping to build new lives. Tom's health improved, and he became the heart of the foundation, his military leadership experience proving invaluable in organizing and inspiring others. His story of losing everything for love resonated with many residents, reminding them that circumstances don't define worth. 1 year after that fateful day on the street, Marcus and Tom sat together on the foundation's rooftop garden, watching residents tend to vegetables they'd planted themselves. You know what I've learned? Marcus said, watching a former resident teach coding to a group of enthusiastic learners. Success isn't about escaping poverty. It's about turning around and extending a hand to others trying to climb out. Tom smiled, the same gentle smile he'd given Marcus that day on the street, but now it reached his eyes. And what about that lesson in economics you wanted to teach me? Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that would have been impossible a year ago. I think you taught me the real lesson. True wealth isn't in a bank account, it's in the courage to remain compassionate, even when life gives you every reason not to be. Below them, the foundation buzzed with activity. A new group of residents was arriving, each carrying their own stories of how life can change in an instant. But now they would find something that both Marcus and Tom had once lost and found again: hope, dignity, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in rising alone, but in lifting others as you climb. The $4.87 that had changed everything now sat in a frame on the foundation's wall, alongside a simple quote: "Every coin is a story of kindness." And beneath it, hundreds of new stories were being written every day, proving that sometimes the greatest wealth comes from losing everything you thought you needed and finding everything that truly matters.